Yeah, we are live. So, hi everyone. Welcome to the webinar by APPSC on rights to privacy and digital surveillance. So, let me invite Prerna to introduce the speaker.
Thanks, Pranav. Thank you for joining uh, today's webinar. I welcome Anushka Jain. She will be talking she will be talking about privacy and surveillance in the digital age. I'll just take 2 minutes to talk a little bit about Anushka and her work. Anushka Jain is a lawyer and policy researcher interested in disruptive technologies such as artificial intelligence, face recognition, and machine learning. She works as the Policy Counsel at Internet Freedom Foundation in Delhi. I thank you very much, Anushka Jain, for taking the time, and the floor is yours now. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me for this event. Um, and yeah, we can begin if you can share the
Yeah,
presentation that I have.
yeah. Is it visible?
Yes. Can you put it on presenter mode, please?
Yeah,
Great. So I will be talking about data privacy in India. Uh, as it's already been mentioned, I am Anushka Jain. I am the Policy Counsel at Internet Freedom Foundation. And my work relates mostly to issues of data protection and surveillance. Um, so, talking about privacy, before I get into the nitty gritties of it, I want to talk about what privacy is and why are we talking about it. um, there is this notion in India, especially in the Indian society, that anybody who's asking for privacy is doing so because they have done something wrong or they have something to hide. The notion is that criminals ask for privacy, and somebody who has done something wrong who wants to hide it, they ask for privacy. However, it's very important to understand that this notion is incorrect. Privacy is not equal to secrecy. What I mean by this is that people who want privacy can want it for many different reasons and not just because they've hidden something. We cherish private spaces to do and be as we like, free from the gaze of others, and not because we've done something immoral or illegal. So, this nothing to hide argument makes an incorrect moral judgment about the kinds of information people want to hide and wrongfully equates privacy with secrecy. Privacy is basically about exercising the choice to withhold information which others have no need to know. And it's also about choosing what you want to share about yourself with the world. Secrecy, on the other hand, no, can you go
oh,
back,
okay.
please? Secrecy, on the other hand, is about withholding information that people may not have a right to know. Um, the right to privacy has been recognized as fundamental in many countries of the world because it enables people to exist and hold opinions without the worry of persecution. Now, what I mean by this is that a lot of times people who are targeted because of their identities and because of the opinions that they hold. In this situation, it becomes very important for any person to have privacy so that they can safely hold their opinions and express their opinions without being worried that they will be harmed or they will be harassed in any way. uh, uh, Such kind of harassment actually can be faced disproportionately by repressed groups such as religious minorities or people who belong to minority sexual orientation groups or gender identity groups. Can you go to the next slide, please? So, what is privacy basically? Privacy is the right to be let alone or freedom from intrusion or interference. And like I said, it's about choosing what to share about yourself and the extent to which you want to share information about yourself, whom you want to share it with, and how you want to share it with. Here, I will give a very simple example. A lot of us have annoying relatives who ask about our jobs, our personal lives, whether we're getting married, who are we getting married to, all of that. And we may not want to tell them what is happening in our lives. That's not because we're doing something incorrect. It's just that we don't want to share that part of our life with the annoying relative, right? So that is basically an understanding of privacy, that you know you just want to choose how to share your identity, your personal information, and you want to choose who you share it with and how you share it. Can you go to the next slide, please? So now I'm going to play this video, which is basically about data privacy. At Internet Freedom Foundation, we are concerned with issues of the internet, and that is why today we're going to be talking about data privacy and digital surveillance. But why is data privacy important? So this is a video that IFF had made, which explains it in a succinct manner. Can you please play the video?
Big corporations keep telling us that our conversations are encrypted and nobody's going to read them. So we may not actually have an FBI agent assigned to read all of our chats. But what these corporations do have access to is a constellation of data points that make up a case file of your behaviors, habits, and preferences, and just intimate things about you, like where you are in the world, your political leanings, what captures your attention, your problems, fears, and essentially what makes you you. Now multiply this by billions of people and practically infinite data points. That's what we call personal data, and companies are hoarding it. Now, why would they do such a thing? Because when anyone gains access to so much information, what they really gain access to is the power that they need to control people. Now, what do they do with so much control? Well, you already know that they can manipulate you and get you to buy things through targeted ads. But advertisers can also micro target you and swing elections or put people of their choice in powerful positions. They can lobby with governments and the police and even potentially influence geopolitics and international relations, which determine how our economies and resources work. They can sell your data to other people, they can leave you vulnerable to scams and exploitation, and even potentially create new norms for social interaction. It's limitless what can happen. It's also not just big corporations that are the problem. Governments like our own are also coming up with policies that threaten to impinge on our privacy.
Thank you. Um, so basically, that's
Big corporations.
you can go to the next slide. So basically, that's a a brief about why it's important to protect your data. But is your data protected in India? That's the big question. But before I come to that, I want to talk about the right to privacy itself. Do we have a right to privacy in India? We do. In the Supreme Court decision of Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India, the Supreme Court held that privacy is a constitutionally protected right, which emerges primarily from the right to life and personal liberty under Article 21 of the Constitution. However, does that mean that privacy is absolute? No. Again, in that very judgment, the Supreme Court held that. Can you click again? The Supreme Court held that any justifiable intrusion by the state into people's right to privacy has to be conforming to certain thresholds. So, they said that right to privacy is a fundamental right, but it's not absolute. And there are certain ways in which it can be infringed upon. But to ensure that this infringement does not violate the right to privacy extensively, or is not something that is not needed, they lay down certain thresholds which have to be fulfilled when the state is infringing upon your right to privacy. So what are these thresholds? The first threshold is legality, where the intrusion must take place must take place in a defined regime of law, which is there should be an anchoring legislation with a clear set of provisions which says that this is what the government is allowed to do, this is how they do it, this is how this is how they will be regulated, and this is what they cannot do. This is what will happen when the government oversteps the extent to which they're allowed to infringe your privacy. And in certain situations, if there are any penalties or any if there are any I'm forgetting the word. If there are any penalties, how will you be able to get your grievance redressed and access those amounts for penalties? The second threshold is no, just go back. The second threshold is necessity. So, what is necessity? Necessity means that the restriction which is being placed upon your right to privacy, or the infringement that is being made upon your right to privacy, should be needed in a democratic society to fulfill a legitimate state aim. So, whatever they are doing, they should be doing in order to pursue a legitimate state aim. And to give an example, when there is a criminal investigation ongoing, in order to investigate the crime, the police may infringe the right to privacy of the suspect, that they have that they think has done the crime. So in that situation, investigation of crime is a legitimate state aim, for which your privacy can be infringed upon. The third threshold is proportionality. What proportionality means is that the government must show, among other things, that the measure being undertaken has a rational nexus with the objective and there is no other alternative. Basically, what this means is that whatever they are doing, it should ensure that this is towards the fulfillment of the state aim, and there should not be anything which is less infringing upon your right to privacy, through which they can also achieve the legitimate state aim. So they have to balance your right to privacy with the state aim and ensure that what they are doing is the only way in which the legitimate state aim can be fulfilled, and there are no other alternatives. The fourth threshold, which is also read into it, is procedural safeguards. Now, what I mean by procedural safeguard is there should be an appropriate independent institutional mechanism with inbuilt procedural safeguards aligned with standards of procedures such as law established by law, which are just, fair, reasonable, to prevent abuse. Basically, this means that you have legality, you have necessity of proportionality, but it is very important to ensure that there are safeguards in place which ensure that if these provisions are violated, or if the government oversteps, there are safeguards in place to ensure that there is remedy that can be provided. Can you go to the next slide, please? But this is a Supreme Court judgment. Coming to actual acts of law or rules, the only thing that we have in India right now are the Information Technology Rules 2011, which are called the SPDI rules, which basically talk about sensitive personal data or information. However, they apply specifically to body corporates. What I mean by this is that these rules are only applicable on private companies. They do not apply to the government. And what they say is that any body corporate which is collecting information needs to have a privacy policy, and they have defined sensitive personal data as any of the ones which is there listed, like password or health conditions or biometric information. And if any company is collecting this sensitive personal data, then they come under the SPDI rules. However, these rules have little to no enforcement, and it's not we're not sure whether companies actually do follow them because of the lack of enforcement. Can you go to the next slide, please? However, in India, there has also been talk about having a right to privacy legislation or a data protection legislation for quite some time. The entire conversation started around 2011, after which there were committees made to come up with the legislation, but it did not really lead anywhere. Then we had the 2017 judgment of the Supreme Court, and in that also they said that there is a need for the union government to come up with the legislation. After that, the union government made the Sri Krishna Committee, which in its report gave the Personal Data Protection Bill of 2018. This bill was then introduced in Parliament as the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019, and as soon as it was introduced, it went to the Parliamentary Committee, the Joint Parliamentary Committee, which had members from both the houses for review and suggestions. After nearly 2 years and several extensions, the Joint Committee finally gave its report on December 16, 2021. And then the new version of the law, which came as a result of this report, was the Data Protection Bill 2021. However, on August 3rd, 2022, last year, the IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav withdrew the Data Protection Bill. And in the reasons of withdrawal, it said that the the bill had been withdrawn to make way for a comprehensive legal framework in the digital ecosystem, and it had been withdrawn also because there had been a lot of back and forth in terms of how the bill had been drafted, and there had been like 80 amendments or something in the bill, and they just thought that the entire process had become very heavy, as a result of which they withdrew the DPB 2021. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, why this withdrawal is disappointing is because the Data Protection Bill 2021 was the result of a long process in which various stakeholders such as civil society, private sector, and other stakeholders had given their inputs, and as a result of that, that bill had developed over time. So the fact that it had taken so long was actually not that bad of a thing, because there were additions and subtractions made from that version of the bill, which included what different stakeholders want. I'm not saying that that version of the bill was a perfect bill. However, it did show that there are that actual public consultation is taking place, and the inputs that are being given by various stakeholders are being inputted into the bill. Right now, there is a legal vacuum for data protection in India, and this is why it is very necessary that we have a data protection law and a surveillance reform specifically, because all of these activities which was there in the video, which Swapnil talked about in the video, all of this is ongoing right now. So even though there is no data protection, data collection by private sector and by the government is ongoing. So basically our data right now is not really protected. So that is why there is a very urgent need for a data protection bill. Can you go to the next slide, please? What we have right now is the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill of 2022, which was introduced for public consultation on November 18, 2022. However, this bill is a significantly smaller bill than the Data Protection Bill of 2021. That bill was around 80 to 90 clauses, and this one is only 30 clauses. And while some people have said that that's a good thing, because it has reduced the legalese and it allows common people to also understand law, we think at IFF that this the cost of this simplification is that the Data Protection Bill of 2022 doesn't really do anything. It leaves a lot to future executive rule making, and it does not actually lay down the law on a lot of important things. However, there are certain clauses in the bill which are specific, and these clauses also are very problematic. Two clauses that I think um, uh, are relevant to our conversation here are firstly, one clause which relates to deemed consent. Now, what I mean by deemed consent is that the bill states that in order to process the data of data principals, which is users like you and me, the data fiduciary or the data processor has to take the informed consent of the data principal. However, the very next clause, which is the deemed consent clause, states that in certain situations, the data fiduciary can deem the consent or assume the consent of the data principal if they consider it necessary for certain situations. And these certain situations include situations such as breakdown of public order for purposes related to employment and in public interest. Now, these terms are extremely vague terms. What do you mean by in public interest? What is in public interest? What is breakdown of public order? What does that mean? Because these terms are extremely vague, almost anything can be read into or interpreted as being resulting in breakdown of public order, or it could be in public interest. And because of this vagueness, there is a scope for wide interpretation, which which could lead to misinterpretation. So there could be multiple situations in which the data fiduciary will think that, okay, this thing can be something which is in public interest, so we are going to deem the consent of the data principal instead of actually asking for informed consent. The second issue that is relevant to our discussion here is clause 18, which talks about exemptions. The union government, under clause 18, has retained the power to exempt any government instrumentality or any government authority, basically, from the application of the entire bill. Basically, what they have done is, um, they have said that this is how data protection in India will work. This is deemed, this is consent, this is notice, this is how you have to do it. These are the rights of the data principals. However, if the government wants, it can notify any government authority which is exempted from the application of the bill, and as a result, they do not have to follow any of the provisions that will be laid down in this bill. What this means is essentially, even though there will be a data protection law, certain authorities will get to work as if there is no data protection law. And why this is an issue is that any exemption which should be granted. And like I said, in Puttaswamy, they have said that right to privacy is not absolute and there can be infringement. But in that situation, they were assessing each and every infringement itself. And they were saying that if the infringement fulfills legality, necessity, proportionality, procedural safeguards, then you can do it. However, in this situation, what the government is doing, instead of examining every situation, it is saying that we are going to exempt an authority itself. So an authority is being exempted, and as a result, all of their actions, instead of being individually examined of whether they fulfill the legality, proportionality, necessity thresholds, all of their actions will be exempted. So anything that they do will be exempted, and this is something that basically would, as a result, violate the Puttaswamy thresholds. Also, the surveillance law in India, which I'm also going to talk about, is very weak. And for the longest period of time, since the conversation about the data protection bill is ongoing, there's also been calls for surveillance reform, which is basically reform of the surveillance architecture in India. However, the data protection bill has failed to put in place any meaningful safeguards against overbroad surveillance of Indian citizens, and as a result, does not really protect the right to privacy of Indian citizens. Can you go to the next slide, please? So, what is surveillance? Surveillance can be of two types, targeted surveillance and mass surveillance. Targeted surveillance, this is where a specific person is targeted and their actions are monitored. Example, Pegasus spyware, which I assume people know. What Pegasus did was, if Pegasus was installed into the device of any person, their entire device was basically, hacked, and it was there various things in the device would be accessible to whoever has hacked it through Pegasus. So in that situation, they are targeting one person whose device is hacked. So that is called targeted surveillance, because there is one specific target. Mass surveillance, on the other hand, happens when a population or a significant component of the population is continuously and indiscriminately monitored, which basically results in each individual in the monitored population becoming a potential target of surveillance or a potential suspect. An example for this would be CCTV cameras. Now, CCTV cameras that are on the road, or any of the public spaces, they do not discriminate between who is coming under the gaze of the camera. Every person who comes under the gaze of the camera is monitored. So that type of surveillance is called mass surveillance. When done by the state, when mass surveillance is done by the state, it can lead to gross violations of the right to privacy, and as a result, it can also result in the violation of other related rights, such as freedom of movement, speech, expression, and the right to protest. Now, why am I saying that these related rights will also be infringed? Can you go to the next slide, please? So, I'm saying that these related rights will be infringed because mass surveillance basically has a chilling effect. And what this chilling effect is that it leads to self-regulation. Um, in the 18th century, Jeremy Bentham came up with this concept of the panopticon. What the panopticon is basically a prison, wherein the prison guard is in a central tower, and the prison is all around him. And while the guard can see the prisoners cannot see the guard. And as a result, the prisoners do not know when they are being monitored, which results in them thinking that they could be monitored at any given moment, right? So as a result, the prisoners will reform their behavior throughout, while being in the prison, instead of just when they come under the gaze of the prison guard, because they do not know when they are being surveilled. So this is the chilling effect that comes off of mass surveillance, which is basically that um, it leads to self-regulation. Now, in our present context, what this chilling effect will mean is that, for example, um, if you know there are CCTV cameras, you may not know whether they work, whether they are being monitored, whether that footage is accessed by any public authority or law enforcement agency. But if you're under the gaze of a CCTV camera, you will reform your behavior accordingly, assuming that if you're under the CCTV gaze, that um, video can be accessible by somebody in a position of power. Similarly, for example, if you go to a protest, right, and there are cameras there, or there is facial recognition technology that is being used on the protesters to identify who the protesters are, that will lead to a certain chilling effect on the protesters who are there, because they will be worried about uh, themselves being identified and then as a result targeted, because protests by their very nature are usually against the authority, the government, and the governments aren't usually happy when protests happen. So even though your right to protest is a fundamental right, and you've not done anything wrong, there could be a chilling effect especially if you see someone else targeted as a result of going to a protest, that the next time you're thinking about going to a protest, you will be worried about whether I should go to the protest, whether it will be safe for me to go to a protest. It can also have a chilling effect on freedom of speech and expression. All of us, there are certain things that we share with the world, for example, on our Twitter or on our Instagram, and there are certain things that we share with a close knit group of friends, or certain things we don't even say on social media, because social media also allows for this kind of constant surveillance wherein whatever you write or whatever you post can be accessed by anyone else. So as a result, you self-regulate and censor yourself and your speech in order to ensure that anything that you say does not lead to you being targeted or persecuted. Can you go to the next slide, please? Surveillance in the digital age is something which has basically magnified the amount of surveillance that people used to face. Now, for example, taking the panopticon example itself, that is a situation wherein there is physical surveillance of prisoners in a prison. However, with our phones, with social media, the access that people have to us is so magnified that there is constant feeling of being surveilled, or constant feeling of our information being accessed by other people, because so much of our lives are online, our data is online, our information is online, and essentially our lives can also be reduced to data points. If, for example, you think about a normal day, um, you have your phone with you, you are talking to someone on text, or you are calling someone, that information, even though WhatsApp says that messages are end to end encrypted, but the metadata, which is basically information about who is sending the information to whom, that is not encrypted. So who are you messaging, and if you're calling someone, who are you calling, that information is with your telecom service provider. um, if you are in one place and you go to another place, if you take an Uber or a cab, so that is also a data point, that this is where you were and this is where you went to. Location data can also allow people to know who was in a similar location at a similar time, to the extent that they could then deduce that these two people met in this location because both of their location data shows that they were here, and there was also a call that was made from one person to the other person. So that is the extent to which data of you online could actually showcase what your life is offline. And especially uh, while this can allow for mass surveillance, because in certain situations such surveillance technology is used by law enforcement agencies, it can also result in other harms, especially because in certain situations it can be extremely inaccurate. For example, in the situation of facial recognition technology is an extremely inaccurate technology, sorry, which is being used by almost all major police departments in the country: Delhi Police, Mumbai Police, Chennai Police, Kolkata Police, Hyderabad, Bangalore, you name it, and they have facial recognition. And they can use this to identify you. However, uh, in certain situations, because the technology is so inaccurate, or because the data itself is so weak, they could end up misidentifying a person in a certain situation, which could lead to them arresting someone who has not committed the crime, because they think that this is the person who has committed the crime. Other than facial recognition and CCTV cameras, there's also other type of technologies such as emotion recognition, which basically means that For example, if you're under the gaze of a CCTV camera and it's connected to an emotion recognition technology system, the emotion recognition will try to assess and identify what kind of emotion you are feeling at a given moment. And it could generate alerts based on what it has identified as threat emotions. And this is not something that's an idea. This is something that's already been deployed, and it was supposed to be deployed in Lucknow, wherein the Lucknow police has said that they will deploy emotion recognition technology to assess when women are displaying emotions of distress. Now, here, what is distress? And how do you identify a woman in distress? If I am in a public space where these emotion recognition enabled CCTV cameras are there, and I am talking to my mother or my sister or anybody, and I'm having a fight with that person, and as a result I'm showcasing emotions or facial expressions of anger, does that mean that I need police help in that situation? No, right? But that kind of discernment cannot be done by emotion recognition. Emotion recognition will see my face and they will see, okay, she is angry, she may be in distress, and that is why a police alert can as a result be generated, because of which police may come and talk to me about, why were you angry in a public space. Just imagine the kind of invasion that will occur as a result of this. However, thankfully, because of a lot of public backlash, the Lucknow police did not deploy emotion recognition in this manner to find distressed women in Lucknow. However, this is something that police departments are more and more thinking about and thinking of using. And similarly, predictive policing. Predictive policing basically is technology which predicts when a crime is going to happen, where it's going to happen, who is going to commit it. And because the data that is being fed into these systems, it can be full of bias. The results that these technologies give can also be full of bias. But because it is basically being washed through a technology which most people think, technology will not show bias, people will think that the technology is right. However, that's not the case. Can you go to the next slide, please? One of the biggest issues with technological surveillance is that it furthers patriarchal norms. Like I said, with the Lucknow police example, what was going to happen in that situation? It was basically uh, the Lucknow police acting as this protectionist force, which would combat any situation in which a woman may be in distress. Right, and this basically shows the kind of over policing of females and female bodies that occur because of these surveillance technologies. And even though in this situation they're trying to protect the woman, basically what they're doing is subjecting women in the public space to further surveillance. But since crimes against women in India are so high, there is a lot of money that has been spent on protecting women from crime, especially in public spaces. And as a result, there are multiple initiatives that have been undertaken for combating crime against women. The Smart City Initiative is one such initiative under the central government, which covers 100 Indian cities, and it aims to harness technology to improve the quality of life in these cities. A core infrastructure element of this initiative is the safety and security of citizens, especially women. And the initiative has proposed budget of 48,000 crores over 5 years, which is basically 100 crore per city per year. And the area of utilization which has been consistent across these cities is investment in developing a robust surveillance infrastructure. Similarly, there is the Safe City initiative, which is under the MHA, which is being undertaken under the Nirbhaya Fund, which was set up after the rape in Delhi, which was termed where the victim was termed Nirbhaya. And it is being undertaken in 8 Indian cities. It aims to create a safe, secure, empowering environment for women in public spaces, and allow them to pursue all opportunities without the threat of gender-based violence and or harassment. But there is also another way in which surveillance affects people. Can you go to the next slide, please? Surveillance also affects historically discriminated against communities disproportionately. Um, as we know, policing in India, especially historically, has been extremely casteist, wherein certain castes have been targeted or over policed by the government, and this has been done because certain communities are seen as habitual criminals, and um, this kind of thinking of the police is also reflected in the records that they create, because basically what, in certain situations at least, the over policing is to the extent that every person in a community will have a police record, and it will say that these communities or these people who belong to these communities are habitual criminals. Now, with digitization, and especially with digitization in policing, there are technology companies which are working with the government to digitize these kind of police records and basically identify people who they suspect will commit crimes in order to allow for their surveillance or enforce surveillance on them. However, the digitization of these already biased police records and extensive surveillance systems and predictive policing through these kind of databases uh, could lead to the creation of a parallel digital caste system, which will basically um, allow for excessive harassment of um, these specifically marginalized communities, instead of doing what they actually want digitization to do, which is to remove bias. Because understand that the information which is being put into these systems is also biased information. So if you put biased information into a system, that system will reflect that bias, right? So it's very important that the bias that is inherent in the Indian policing system is first removed, or at least in these records is first corrected for, and then this information is put into these systems in order to ensure that this kind of bias is not reflective. Can you go to the next slide, please? Coming back to how this affects women, it does affect women disproportionately, like I've already talked about, because increasing reliance is placed on these security systems to solve issues related to women's safety. Um, and this results in the constant surveillance of women in public spaces, which not only violates their privacy but also perpetuates existing patriarchal norms. Um, why this is also important to note is that the surveillance that is being done is being done by an overwhelmingly male police force, which is basically because uh, in our country only 7.28% of the police force is female, which means that most of the time when this kind of surveillance is ongoing, it's ongoing through men or through fraud technology in determining how a woman should exist in a public space. Next slide, please. However, the question that we should ask ourselves is, do these technologies even work? Especially in terms of reducing crime against women, uh, there is no study or no numbers which show that uh, there is, if CCTV cameras or facial recognition is used, crime against women goes down. So what is the point of these technologies? Similarly, there are multiple studies which show, on the other hand, that these kind of uh, technologies show bias against communities which have been discriminated against historically, religious identities which have been discriminated against historically. However, still the use of these technologies is increasing, especially in public spaces and by law enforcement agencies, which will definitely lead to these historically discriminated against communities facing more harassment and more over policing, because this will allow the police to basically monitor each and every action and pick them up even when they've not done anything wrong. Thank you. That was basically my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. The first question I want to ask is like, so recently, even in Google and other data companies, a lot of conversation has been started on how the machine learning models that are being made, the training data, like how they were trying to use these models for even judgments in the judicial system.
Yeah.
So can you tell more about how that can impact, for example, in a country like India?
Definitely. So again, the data that it is being trained upon is historical data that is available, and here it's very important to see that a lot of times it has happened that people who belong to discriminated against communities have been either being given a sentence which is harsher than people who belong to other communities, or people who belong to other communities have not been punished for the same offense that a person belonging to discriminated against community has been punished for. So what does this tell the system or the AI? That the the turning point is not the offense. The turning point is the identity of the person. And as a result, even when giving judgments, for example, it will give harsher punishment or harsher uh, sentences to people who belong to certain communities, instead of applying the law. Because here there are various data points that will be fed into this kind of AI. And what's very important to understand is that this kind of AI and machine learning, after a certain point, even the people who've developed this do not know how it's making decisions, because this is artificial intelligence. This is not really your simple computer calculator, which is wherein your 2 plus 2 is 4. That's not the case. This is wherein you are giving data into a system, and it is then identifying certain data points, and then as a result it is coming up with um, results. So what it will identify as a crucial data point, which on the basis of which it is giving certain results, is sometimes or most of the times in a black box, which is basically that you cannot even understand why this result has been given. So in this situation, you cannot even correct for bias that the system may be displaying, because you do not know how the system has come to this result. So that is why such kind of use, especially by law enforcement agencies or by judicial proceedings, can be extremely harmful, because the data itself that is being used is full of bias. And as a result, the system, even though they claim it will be bias free and it will be AI will be perfect, uh, AI will not be perfect, because it will basically perpetuate existing biases which are there in the data that is being fed to it.
Another question is much more regarding what is happening in IIT. So in IIT, when a student enters the campus, they have to mandatorily give their biometric information. And IIT does not actually have a privacy policy, like which they tell that, okay, your data is protected, or how it is protected, why this is being collected. And their logic is, for attendance you have to you need your fingerprint, so that like we need to take your biometric. So my question is it legal for an organization to collect it like this, and is biometric like useful, like is there any drawback to it? And because our biometric data is connected to Aadhaar card, is connected to bank accounts and things like that, so should we actually give such a data without any like accountability from the institute?
See, one thing is that the conversation of whether it's legal or illegal is something that's not really pertinent here, because all of this is happening in a legal vacuum. Like I said, there are no data protection laws in India, and the SPDI rules apply only to private actors and are not really enforceable. They do not apply to government or government institutions, which I think IIT is, and as a result, all of this data collection is basically happening in the absence of any law which will regulate this kind of collection. There is the Puttaswamy decision. However, that's a decision which says that this is the right you have. For something to be illegal, there has to be a law which says that this is what you can do, this is what you cannot do, and if you do this, then you're in violation of this law, and that is why that action is illegal. So, what can be is that, this kind of data collection, if it fails to fulfill the thresholds in Puttaswamy, can be violative of a Supreme Court judgment. That's what is there, but there's no law which says that this is what is legal and this is what is illegal. However, definitely coming to the matter at hand, such collection of biometric data is extremely harmful, because again, remember, your password or stuff like that can be changed, your biometric information cannot be changed, your iris scan, your fingerprint, your facial signature, it cannot really be changed after a point of time, right? And because it's connected to all of these systems, it can result in a lot of harm. First, if it's breached and your data gets out, and then it's misused by somebody for profit. Also, in situations where it's misused by in the sense that there is a profile of you that is created, and because
Yeah, I think we can continue.
okay.
So the next question is regarding, for example, because like most of the time when we question like why is this particular data being collected, the question is in some sense like because most of the people don't see why for example, when COVID was there, every time we go out of IIT, we have to show our ID card, and it's not just that we have to show it, it will be recorded. Like they will scan the barcode and record what time you went out and what time you came in. After COVID also, they have not stopped this particular procedure of so basically they are collecting and logging the data of when a student is going out and coming in. Now they have started the same thing for mess. Like whenever we go and eat food, the time is being logged in and the data is being saved. And there is really no reason to actually save this kind of data. Then another thing is now they, in the name of safety, they are putting CCTV camera in the hostel corridor, inside the hostel corridor, like right outside the room. So even to go to a washroom, it is under CCTV camera surveillance. So there is an overreach of without any accountability or explanation to why these measures are being done, and it is made compulsory. Now there is no okay, there might be some students who might be okay with it. There is no consent that is being asked in such cases. So can you explain why this is problematic, and how should we make people aware of what are the issues with this kind of blindly collecting or giving away the data without actually questioning it? Because since there is no law to actually question the institute with, at least we have to ask accountability from them. Why are you doing this?
Definitely. And see, that's the issue with a lot of with the understanding of right to privacy in India. Just because you're in a public space does not mean your right to privacy has ended. Even in a public space you have a right to privacy, because privacy attaches itself to the person and not to the place that you're in. That does not mean that just in your room you have privacy. You have privacy wherever you're going. This kind of excessive data collection is extremely harmful, actually, because what it allows uh, for is uh, purpose creep. And what I mean by purpose creep is that they're saying, maybe it's not happening in IIT, but what could actually happen is that they're saying that they're putting in these cameras for safety purposes and to ensure that nothing bad happens, but then this kind of CCTV is then being used for other purposes, and these other purposes could actually be extremely harmful. Also, for example, if there are CCTV cameras that have been installed into women's hostels. This could be that why are you awake at this hour? Why are you going to her room at this hour? What is the conversation that is happening there? If somebody is if there is a protest that somebody has organized, then they will try to ascertain who has come to their room, where that person has gone, to identify people who they think are involved. So all of this surveillance is usually used to investigate the people under the gaze instead of protect them from something bad happening. And this is how we've seen this happening not just in India but also outside India, in London, in the US. Most of these CCTV cameras or this kind of facial recognition technology is usually used by the police to investigate crimes or to identify people who are not even committing crimes, but all are doing something which the police or which the institution is not happy with, and as a result target them. So this is why it's very important to ensure that any data collection that is happening is first of all happening with consent, and this consent has been obtained for a specific purpose. Here, this is happening in a non-consensual manner, and you don't even know what the purpose is in a lot of situations. What is the point of collecting people who are going into the mess or coming out of it? Or what is the end that is being served, and is that end necessary enough for the invasion into the right to privacy? Going back to what the Pottaswamy decision has said, is it a legitimate state aim? Is it necessary in a democratic society to do this kind of data collection? Is the question that should be asked. And why is it being done? What is it being used for? Is something that institutions should be transparent about. Because if not, then there are legitimate questions with which anyone who comes under this kind of surveillance will ask as to why is this happening. And you're right, there are no regulations, especially that is why we need specific regulations, not just in terms of data protection but also in terms of how CCTV is used. For example, in India, the amount of CCTV deployment is at an all-time high. New Delhi is one of the most surveilled city. Indore is extremely surveilled. Bangalore, Hyderabad, Mumbai, all of these cities are extremely highly surveilled. More and more CCTVs are being put in, not just in public spaces but also in privately owned spaces. And the way that it is being done is definitely infringing upon privacy of individuals who have not consented to this kind of surveillance, but it is happening. And this is because there's no regulation or law which would say that this is excessive, this should not be done. So that is, I think, the issue here.
Is there any like current PALs going because like we can claim, right, like if there is certain kind of surveillance that is happening, even though there is no like there's no law to actually protect it, but can we call it like the judicial violation based on Pottaswamy judgment?
Yes, definitely. There are multiple PILs actually which are ongoing. For example, the Delhi government has installed CCTV cameras in Delhi government schools and classrooms. So that is something that has been challenged before, I think, the Delhi High Court. In Telangana, the use of facial recognition has been challenged before the Telangana High Court. and there are I think another challenge to the facial recognition is also there in Lucknow, I think, in Uttar Pradesh. Um, so there are definitely multiple petitions that are in different courts, and they have progressed differently, which are taking up this issue. However, again, this is not something, and while this is good that this is being questioned on the basis of the Kutasami's decision, a lot of this would be simplified if there was a law which would regulate it. However, there are definitely petitions which are ongoing in terms of CCTVs and facial recognition being used in different spaces on different identities of people throughout the country.
Is there any draft bill data protection bill that has been made, which is like considered like something which is really good that has been proposed?
So there are a lot of private member bills that have been introduced in the parliament by different members, such as um, Shashi Tharoor, and also another by Dr. Ravi. One of the bills was actually supported by IFF, which was the Indian Privacy Code, which had 7 privacy principles, which IFF thinks are important for any data protection law. So there are these kind of bills that have been proposed. However, the bill that is under consideration right now is the draft Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, which has been drafted by the Ministry of Information and Technology in 2022.
So last question. This is from YouTube. Is this mostly about what are the ways that we can protect ourselves from digital surveillance? For example, like things like Pegasus, or like other kind of not losing our metadata. Like what kind of browsers should we use, or like what kind of apps can be better? Like what are the kind of practices that we should follow while surfing the internet? So
See, again, one thing I want to clarify is I'm not a digital security expert. I don't want to give digital security advice here. Um, you cannot really protect yourself from Pegasus. Pegasus, previously, it was a one-click uh, spyware wherein a link came to you on WhatsApp or somewhere. You click on it and Pegasus gets installed. Now, the extent to which that spyware has been developed, there does not even need to be one click, right? So in that situation, how will you protect yourself? You cannot protect yourself with somebody who has the capability to buy and operate Pegasus in a country, for example, like in India. And if that person is targeting you or that authority is targeting you, there's little to nothing that you can do. However, there are certain best practices of digital security that can be followed, which I don't again want to get into. But there are multiple articles online which talk about digital security and what you can do. For example, like don't have one password for all your email or all your settings. Have like a password generator which gives random passwords, and have it in like somewhere that you can save password. And again, that is also not safe. LastPass and other password collecting like these apps, they have also been breached. So what do you do in that situation? So I don't want to really get into the issue of digital security, but again, here it's very important to understand that there is very little that one individual can do to protect themselves in a situation where the system itself is conducive to such things. What you can do is like go and live like a hermit, but is that really possible in India today? Right, from UPI payments to booking cabs to booking flight tickets, train tickets, so much of it has become online, and in certain situations prohibitively online. For example, with COVID, this is what we saw with COVID, right? Access to vaccines was completely through COVID, and people who did not have access to internet or who did not know how to operate internet did not get access, and could not book vaccines because they do not know how it works. So it's very difficult to actually live away or live divorced from technology in the country right now. So that is why it's actually very wrong to take responsibility upon yourself to, if something happens to me, this is my fault. No, this is not the fault of you that you were targeted. Especially like people who get targeted in like these fraud schemes or whatever. This is something that is conducive because of the environment that has been created, because there's a legal vacuum, because there are no protections. And while the government is talking about, bringing protections or bringing safeguards, there's nothing yet. And even when they come, whether they are whether they actually work or whether they are overprotective and as a result more harmful is also something that needs to be seen.
I think we can conclude the session. Thank you, Anushka, for spending time and creating awareness about right to privacy and the perils of digital surveillance.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I will stop the live stream.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I hope it went